Hey guys, it's Michelle. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a fun tutorial for you guys showing you how to use alcohol inks to create fun backgrounds. My backgrounds today are going to be inspired by the Northern Lights. I just really wanted to play around with some nice colors and create some fun backgrounds. I'm going to turn one into a card and one into a planner page with a quote. So this is great for any kind of crafting that you do, even if it's not card making, or if you just want to play with some colors and get your fingers inky, this is a great medium to try out. So let's get started. So as I mentioned, the alcohol ink tutorial I'll be doing today is inspired by the Northern Lights. So I pulled up a photo on my phone and I'm just going to have that handy next to me just so that I can make sure I'm getting the colors right, just to really help me visualize what I'm trying to do. So I pulled out some Yupo paper, which is a type of paper that you typically use with alcohol inks. It kind of has like a glossy feel to it, almost like photo paper. If you don't have Yupo paper or can't find it, you can try this with photo paper, but I think the results will just be a little bit different. And then I have some alcohol ink here. These are from Ranger. You can get these at Michael's or online. And I also have some rubbing alcohol. Oh, and I also have two little mixatives of the alcohol ink that are kind of like these metallic shimmers that you can add to your alcohol ink. So with my sheet of Yupo paper here and some scrap paper underneath, just a side note, you want to have more scrap paper than this. You tend to kind of make a mess with this technique, so you just want to make sure you have your desk covered really well. So I'm just dropping some colors here. I'm starting off with blues since this is a sky scene and I want it to be mostly blue. And I don't have a purple, so I'm dropping some of my red on top of the blue spots that I created, just in the hopes that it will turn kind of purpley. It still stayed pretty red, but we'll fix that a little later. You can just see how on this Yupo paper the alcohol ink spreads pretty much immediately. You might also see in the beginning I just rubbed some clean rubbing alcohol right over the paper just to give it a nice wet base so that all of the colors will blend really well on top of that. I often do this with watercolors as well. I like to just wet my entire paper before I even put any inks on top of it. So you can see after I drop all of these colors, I just kind of move the paper around, add more rubbing alcohol. This is all kind of just trial and error, so even though this is a tutorial, every result is going to be different. So I guess this is more like a process video. But anyway, I am kind of creating these stripes that are going all towards one point because in my photo that's kind of what it looked like, and I'm adding color as I need. You'll see that the ink pulls up a lot on the edges of the paper, so I just like to have a rag handy, which you can see on the side, and I like to just drip off all the excess ink as I'm doing this. So I'm going to put that first piece aside to dry a little bit, and I pulled out a different sheet of Yupo paper, just a brand new one, and I'm just going to try this technique again. Like I said, every result is different. You might not get exactly what you want on the first try, but you can just keep trying, and the great thing with this Yupo paper is if this dries down and you don't like the way it looks, you can actually just take rubbing alcohol and pretty much wipe it all away and start all over again. So there's nothing to lose here. You can just play around with it. You can see I'm adding those shimmery mixatives in. I have a gold one and a silver one. So the first one I put silver and the second one I did gold just to get different results and see how it turns out. I'm going to put that second piece aside for now and move back to the first piece, which has dried a little bit. And I'm just going to play around with it a little more, add more ink, because I think the depth of color wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be. I think it just needed to be a little bit deeper. Even though it's really colorful on the paper right now, you can still see that white of the paper showing through. So I'm just going to keep layering ink on top of this just to get a nice blend of dark colors. And then again, I put that aside to dry. And while it's drying, I'm going to pull out yet another piece of paper. You might as well, if you're waiting for your pieces to dry, just play around with another one. Maybe you'll like that one better with a little bit of practice. So again, I'm going to just throw a bunch of ink on there, see how it turns out. You really can't predict what this is going to do, so just add more rubbing alcohol, let it drip, and move it around, and I think it looks really cool, even just like this. If you just want to stop here, especially if you're new to alcohol inks, this is really fun to just make a bunch of these just by letting the ink do its own thing and move around. And for this one, I'm mixing my red and blue colors in a little dish just to create a purple color, because I wasn't getting that purple just by mixing it on the paper, so I'm doing it separately in this dish and then dripping it on top of my paper. For this one, I'm creating that like center radiating point at the bottom vertically. On the other ones, I kind of did it in a landscape orientation, but I wanted to have this vertically because I plan to use a piece like this in a planner. So again, I'm mixing up some more purple and letting that drip into the centerpiece. You can see this one definitely has more depth of color, and I'm just playing around using that rubbing alcohol in my little cup there just to move the color around when it's not moving enough on its own. Just as a side note, be prepared to get your hands really dirty when you're doing this technique. I ended up getting a lot on my fingers. I did this maybe like 3 days ago and I still have alcohol ink under my nail, so just so you know, it does get a little dirty. So at some point I had a little too much ink on my paper and it was getting really muddy, so I brought in a piece of paper towel and kind of just blotted that away. And I really like how that worked, because even though it seems counterintuitive that you're kind of like taking away all that ink that you just spent so much time putting on, I love the effect that it leaves, because it leaves sort of like a stain on the paper. So like I said before, there's that like undertone of white that I didn't like because the color didn't look deep enough. But when you use the paper towel to kind of take away all that surface ink, you can see the undertone of all the colors you had worked so hard to put on there. So I'm just revisiting the other pieces I did because I love the idea so much. So I did the same thing where I added more ink and then used a paper towel to blot on top of that. And then I'm using my brush here to create those radiating like brush marks almost that will make it look like the Northern Lights. And this is just, like I said, trial and error. You add more colors if you think that a color got a little lost, or if you think you have too much, you can just take it away. So after a bit, I just figured I would put them aside and let them dry, because you could seriously go on forever just going back to the same pieces, working over and over again. I let them dry, and this is how they turned out. I think that one of them doesn't quite look like Northern Lights, but I think it's still really pretty, and two of them I think came out pretty well. So I'm going to save one of them for another project, and then I'm going to use two of them right now. I'm going to create a card and a little like quote page for my planner. And you can see here I'm showing you my fingers because the ink transferred a lot just because I have so many layers of ink on this paper. So I'm doing a little artist trick here. This is an old trick that you learn in art school, but I'm taking some hairspray, just normal hairspray, whatever you have, and I'm going to spray it on top of all of these pieces. And this kind of seals in the ink just like a fixative would, but I didn't have fixative, so I just wanted to use hairspray to do that. You want to do this in a well-ventilated area because it will stink. And while that hairspray is drying on those pieces, I'm going to pull out a stamp set. This is a sentiment stamp set from My Favorite Things. I will link the exact stamp set down below in the description box. And I'm just going to emboss one of the sentiments onto some white cardstock in liquid platinum embossing powder. I just think that the silver of this embossing powder will tie in really nicely with that metallic shimmer that I have on these cards. And sorry for bouncing around here, but I'm moving on to a different piece right now, and this is going to be the piece that's going to be my planner quote page. It's going to go in this first page of my bullet journal, which I kind of walked you through a couple of videos ago, but I left the first page blank because I wanted to put a little decorative element, which I'm doing right now. So I just picked out a quote that I wanted for the front of my journal that would motivate me every time I open it. And I'm just lettering that in a silver gel pen. This is a Uniball Signo gel pen in silver. I love all their gel pens, especially the metallic ones. They are just so pretty, and they write really nicely. So this wrote pretty well on the alcohol ink. If you try to write on top of this paper, especially after you've put all this ink on it, you'll find that it is a little difficult with most types of pens or markers, but this gel pen did pretty well. So I'm just doing some really simple lettering. I'm not the best at hand lettering, but I tried my best. And then afterwards I added sort of like drop shadows on my letters with a copic marker. Just because I found that the silver wasn't standing out as much as I wanted it to on top of this paper, on top of all of those colors. And copic markers were kind of like the only marker I found worked on top of this, and it makes sense because it's an alcohol-based marker. I tried even Sharpie and that didn't work, so yeah, if you have copic markers, this would be great to use on top of it. And then now bouncing back to my other piece, I'm just trimming off the edges so that it is the size of a standard card front. I like to trim from a little bit from all four sides instead of just trimming from two sides, just because you do get a lot of those like dark areas where the ink has pulled when you are doing the alcohol ink. So I just like to center the design around the nice not inky parts. So I have my little embossed sentiment and I'm placing that on my card, but then I realized that I wanted to add some trees to this to make it really look like the Northern Lights, because otherwise it just looks like a pattern, but once you add trees it really transforms it into this landscape, and I think it makes it a lot more obvious what you are trying to do. I'm bringing out a dark gray copic marker just to create these kind of like shadows of trees, and then I brought in like a blacker, darker color to go on top of that outline of trees, and then I created a few more, and it just creates this nice little shadow of a forest that I think really pulls together this whole scene really nicely. Then I'm taking that silver gel pen that I used on my quote planner page, and I'm just drawing in some stars here just to make it look even more like a night sky. And I think with that, it really does pull it all together. It looks like the Northern Lights pretty much, as close as I could get it anyway, and I think it was just a really cool technique to try. And even if it doesn't really look like the Northern Lights, I had a lot of fun playing with the ink, and sometimes that's all that matters. Alright you guys, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. I hope that you're inspired to play with alcohol inks, get your fingers dirty, and just play around a little bit. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time.